Okay, Tyler. So I say SolarEdge and Enphase, and most investors immediately throw them in one basket and say, yeah, they're just kind of the same thing. Look at the stock price. They're both down like 62, 63% from their recent highs. And that just more compounds the idea that they're like thing one and thing two in the solar industry for the solar panel level electronics that they make. But they're two very different companies in a lot of ways. I'm going to break down what Enphase does. I want you to talk about SolarEdge. We talk about how they're different companies. And then at the end, maybe we can ask one another, which do we think is the better buy right now?
I love the fact you made a Dr. Seuss reference. So let's go.
Thing one, thing two. So here's a question between you and me: who's thing one and who's thing two? Never mind. Don't even answer that. All right, let's have this conversation. But first, just a reminder: our videos are sponsored by The Motley Fool. If you're looking for even more great stock ideas than our Enphase and SolarEdge conversation, please go to our special link, fool.com/the smattering. Motley Fool is going to give you its 10 best stocks to buy right now. Please check out that link after the video. Okay, Tyler, how about you kick it off? So again, Enphase and SolarEdge, they do a lot of the same stuff. They compete for the same customers in a lot of cases, but there are some differences. So what is SolarEdge?
To say they're the same thing is kind of going historically, they almost were at the beginning,
Yeah.
right? Like
Oh
they,
yeah, no
they
doubt
both
about it.
started as suppliers to the residential solar industry, providing what, for a lack of a better term, they were either called optimizers or inverters. It's basically because solar energy, hits panels and creates direct current energy, and these inverters, optimizers, uh, is a way to transfer it to alternative current that you get to use into your house. It sounds incredibly simple. I mean, if you went to did like engineering school in undergrad, you probably actually made an inverter. So it's not exactly the most complicated thing, but these were both businesses that found a way to make an advanced product in that simple idea that had good margins for quite a while. And with the tailwinds of residential, uh, became a relatively profitable business for both of them, and were pretty cash generative. And from there, they both started to diversify, and that's where we started to see a little bit more of a branching out into slightly different categories and how they really start to differentiate themselves from each other. So SolarEdge, I would argue, is a little bit more internationally, has a little bit more international exposure than Enphase does. Enphase really got going when it acquired the inverter business from SunPower a while ago, and that was a transformative thing for them, but it was very much tied to the US residential solar market. And SolarEdge, being an Israeli company, had a lot more exposure to Europe, and so a little bit more international exposure there. And with a slowdown in Europe, it's been a little bit different for them in terms of margins, in terms of growth and whatnot. But what they have also done is they've gone into some similar things. They're also competing on things like chargers for the home, energy storage for the home, a lot of the smart metering sort of things that that allow you to get paid by your utility when you're sending excess energy versus when you're taking it in. So a lot of competing products, but
Yeah,
on
there's
top
a
of that,
chance if you're a U.S. Residential solar user and you've had your system installed sometime in the past 5 years, you probably have either SolarEdge or Enphase inverters or microinverters or power optimizers. Right? That's the reality.
yeah,
They're well over 90% of the U.S.
yeah,
distributed solar residential market, and they're both moving into Europe.
yeah.
So that's where they're the same. Where are they different?
So a couple places that SolarEdge is investing in specifically, they are starting to build commercial and utility scale inverters. So rather than just focusing on residential sized, you got it on your house. How many do you have? Seven, eight,
32.
30? Oh, I missed it big time. But versus the thousands or tens of thousands on a utility scale, that's a whole different game and requires a different product. And the way that SolarEdge's particular system works, it's a little bit better fitted for utility
Mhm.
than Enphase's. So it can go into that a little bit more and try to pursue some potential growth in that area. And also another that they are getting into is electric vehicle drivetrains or powertrains, battery supplies and some of the powertrains and things like that. It made some, SolarEdge made an acquisition a couple of years ago of a South Korean battery company. It was, it's not LG, it's not Panasonic. Those are a little bit more commodity. They bought a company called Koton, which was lithium-ion batteries, a little bit more advanced tech, but didn't really have a huge manufacturing base. And so they're going down that route, and they actually were able to secure a supplier contract with Stellantis for its Fiat commercial transit van, specifically marketed for Europe. So it has that kind of outlet that is branching away from Enphase. Now, whether or not that's the better choice is up for debate, but this is kind of us just laying out the land of what makes them really different today.
A couple things about those SolarEdge kind of diversification strategies, optionality strategies, I think are worth mentioning too. Is I don't think either one of those are diversification, to coin the Peter Lynch phrase, because they're leveraging their existing know-how with the EV powertrain systems, the drivetrain systems, again, because a lot of that is DC current, and it's really their business is based on understanding DC current and the conversion of DC to AC. So there's good overlap there. And the entire automotive industry relies on supplier relationships. So there's some similarity there to the solar industry that relies on supplier relationships, that is also a pretty good fit. And again, you look at what they've done with the battery tech, a lot of that has helped feed into energy storage for residential, but also battery backup and some things that they're doing on the commercial and industrial side there. So it's given them some opportunities to diversify and expand the base of their business. Now you look at Enphase, and Enphase has chosen to stay relatively focused on what they're doing. They've also expanded into energy storage. Disclosure, I have Enphase microinverters and Enphase batteries in my own home. I think it's just worth mentioning. I have a pretty substantial personal investment in those assets in my home. And the two companies started moving into residential storage at similar times. Enphase's rollout and execution was far better. SolarEdge kind of stumbled out of the gates a little bit and was delayed in getting their product to market. Just they haven't done as well, frankly. Enphase has done better with that. Enphase, again, also has EV charging stations, and their focus, again, is residential. It's a hardware play. They're not looking to make money selling power or on services that you might hear from like the charge points or some of those other companies that are doing, or even Tesla with their charging station network. But the point is, it stayed more disciplined than and focused on that business, while SolarEdge has started to diversify a little bit more. Tyler, let's talk briefly about how it's affected the two companies up to this point in terms of their return profiles, because these have both been massive winners. You look over really going since the first of the two went public, I think SolarEdge stock's up 506%. And this goes back to 2015, mid 2015. At the same time, Enphase stock is up 951%. So it's a 10 bagger versus, a 6 bagger. That's both have been enormously successful compared to the S&P 500 or objectively just about every other investment over that period. Investors have been very pleased with the results. Now, one thing I want to point out that is very different right now, if you look at the two of them, you look at the stocks, you look at the pricing. SolarEdge between the two is cheaper, right? It trades for a little bit better valuation.
Yeah, it right now has a forward price earnings ratio about 14 times. So it gives you an idea of kind of where we're at pricing rate. Comparatively speaking, this was a company not too long ago. We were talking about PE in the 40s and 50s.
There's a reason for that, though. I think there's a reason it's a little bit cheaper on a PE basis than Enphase is. And I'm just going to quote one metric for both companies that we've seen a bit of a divergence. And this really goes back to 2019 or so, about the whole time that battery strategy kind of not executing as well for SolarEdge, and also SolarEdge's move into the EV powertrains business, kind of when they started focusing on that. We've seen a big divergence in their operating margins, where Enphase's operating margins are in the low 20% range, and you're looking at around 10%, 10 to 12% operating margins for SolarEdge. So twice the profitability at the operating level, which is a pretty big difference. And so there's a reason that SolarEdge stock is a little bit cheaper right now than Enphase's stock. The next question, Tyler, that I think we should answer is looking at both businesses, looking at the valuations, looking going forward, right? We can talk about maybe one's executed better than the other, one's diversifying more than the other. Put it all together. You're putting your money down today. Which stock would you buy first?
I have owned SolarEdge for a long time, and it's kind of typically been my go-to, but there is that thought that it may actually be not the best diversification strategy, and that it may just end up being middling returns for them for these new bets. And that would give me enough pause to maybe not want to get too more involved in SolarEdge and probably a little bit more leaning towards Enphase, despite the valuation. Can't say I'm a huge fan of it. I'd like to buy it for less, but you know, forced to choose between the two right now, I guess I would have to go with that one.
I think I would still lean towards Enphase as well when you're thinking about execution. I think both probably have a pretty good chance of outperforming going forward over the next 5 years just because of the sheer growth potential, their history of getting really good margins, and the likelihood that they're going to continue to have dominant market share, potentially even take market share, especially for SolarEdge, if they can really execute on that EV supplier business. If they can execute on that, it could be definitely the bigger winner of the two. But I'm leaning Enphase right now as well.